truth in voice AI.
So thank you, Alan, so much. First of all, let's do just an audio check. Am I coming in through
Loud and
clear? It's
clear.
loud and clear.
Yeah.
Excellent. Always. I don't usually use Zoom, so I'm usually on Google Meet. So I always want to double check before getting too far in here. Well, first of all, Alan, I want to say thank you for having me on. This is fun to always go through, and your sessions are always interesting to go through. As we're getting into this. This is a zero slide session. This is a conversation. So please
Perfect.
interrupt me. It's always more fun that way. I can do slides, but it's always more fun to chit chat and exchange ideas around stuff in here. That's what I've really enjoyed the session, your conferences on that. So
Cool. Go for it.
excellent. So step one, what is in this talk? And number one, I'm not going to sell you anything other than perhaps a little just of my expertise and experience. This talk is not about Consig and what we're building there, but rather a little bit of, I'll say looking back at what I'll call the voice AI industry of what's happened before and some of my opinions. And I say opinions because, listen, I'm making guesses. This is my thoughts around the matter. Nobody can predict the future, certainly not me. I've screwed up many of times, but it's fun to think about this. And I find this a very interesting time to be in the communications industry because there is so much change and so much going on very, very rapidly. So with that, let me just get for folks that haven't known me, just a little bit about my background. Very non-traditional childhood growing up. I grew up in the Silicon Valley, specifically actually outside the Silicon Valley in hippie land called Santa Cruz. Lived in a Volkswagen van and, took the path that, I actually never went to school a day of my life. I've never been in a classroom. That's one of those like little unusual pieces. Some people say, and never went to college. I actually never went even to kindergarten. My parents homeschooled me. It was a very different background than I learned that, I got introduced into tech, a very different path. For me, it was one of those areas that became a passion. I think I first discovered computers when I was 12, when I was at the Santa Cruz Public Libraries had this cool, they were one of the first computer-based indexing systems around it. And I somehow managed to hack into the back end of it so I could actually get the admin screen. Thankfully, they did not throw me out. Instead, they put me to work and made me start organizing and teaching me around it. And that was kind of a good foundation portion of it. I've always loved speech. I'll blame some of this on the days of Star Trek: The Next Generation and just being able to talk to computers. I will admit I was an early Mac user, so I was one of the earliest users of Apple's PlainTalk. If you go back to 1993, they were one of the first people to go through and you introduce speech recognition into it. I didn't really have a computer myself, but I spent a lot of time at the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Cruz. They had a Mac lab. Everything was there. So I was really got through. Amusingly, I joked it was actually all donated by HP, which is one of those ironic, I always found it amusing, but actually both of those companies were very early Silicon Valley, very big in donating to education. They really brought a lot of that. And this interest drove me from the beginning of being able to talk to my computer or trying to play with dictation. My God, the 90s were horrible from a technology perspective. It was just painful. It never got anything right. But that passion stuck with me kind of all the way through it. And, I got my first job working in the world of telecom. And I got to work on the Dream Project, it was like 96, 97. I was working to build Charles Schwab's speech recognition application to trade stocks. This was one of the earliest commercial applications of large domain speech recognition. And it was kind of cool. It was built on an early nuance recognizer. We were building on the IBM platform. And my God, it was complicated. My God, it was horrible. And it really didn't work, but it was what I'll call one of those early efforts to bring speech into the domains. And I saw the complications in there, and I kept starting to think maybe there's better ways. This led into what I'll call it was at that day what I'll call the first generation. It was all directed dialogue. At the end of the day, it was always asking you a question, and you had to follow the menu. Most of these systems lead to what I call generation one, which is the horrible state that most of the system still is stuck in, which is the flowchart. And fundamentally, that's one of my, I'll say core pieces of what we're thinking about at Consig is how do we build a voice system that you never see a flowchart? We've said that's almost a banned piece of visualization for an authoring perspective. We might use it to visualize the results, but never the creation, because I think it's a flawed design paradigm, even though it is work, but it leads to
it was an IVR. It was an IVR where basically you didn't understand you half the time. Could you repeat that?
And so it's funny. We went, and this is, so I'm going to put this leads into, like I said, what I'll call the second 1.5, which was the introduction to standards. Because before it was all this proprietary technology. Yeah. God help you trying to write this. And that's really what got my mission in starting at Voxeo was we started saying with the mission of let's make it accessible so that anyone can develop this, because that's going to drive innovation and ideas. And this led to what I'll call the voice portal era, things like tell me, be vocal, quack, all these ideas. And that, I said, it was a little bit of a misguided idea that we were going to go all browse the web over the voice. And it failed horribly, but because it's not a good interface. This technology wasn't there and it didn't work. But through this, I'll say I learned some really clever hacks. And this is where I'll say I started learning the power of user interface design. First of all, one of our biggest competitors tell me these guys were one of the best folks out there. They were much focused on the larger enterprise. They focused on what I'll call the 7-digit customer. Customers who had 7-digit budgets to go through this. And this was American Express, United Airlines, was the big boys in the market. And honestly, I'll say for folks, the automation and voice technologies has been constrained to this 7-digit world for almost as long as I've been working. If you have 7 digits, I'm not going to say there's great solutions, but there's mature solutions. And you're going to be able to get, you have multiple vendors to pick from. I think you can go get a really good solution, and no matter who you pick, you're going to pick something that really is going to be a state of the art. The problem is there's been this giant barrier, and you were talking earlier about how do you bring this down to the SMB, and this is kind of what brought me back was nobody has targeted taking it down to 5 digits, 4 digits. How do you take it even lower? And that's been kind of the driving mission that going after around this. Yeah. But coming back to kind of what I'll say, one of the things I learned was actually the power of the clever hack and cheating. And this is one of those things I go through is like, my 2 examples of this was one of the coolest voice apps I ever worked on was for MTV, and it was a virtual Beavis and Butthead. You actually could call in, interact with them. And I didn't design the voice interface. We worked with a great team that did this. But what they leveraged is the fact that Beavis and Butthead are stupid. So the fact that speech recognition never understood you was fine. They had over 200 prompts for not understanding you that they would rotate through randomly. And it became part of the entertainment value, the fact that they didn't understand you. They just actually worked that into the dialogue design. And I actually came across out of that was like, actually, if you think about UX creatively and think about how you go through, you can build great solutions even when the technology doesn't work. Mm-hmm. The other one I'll look at that was absolutely like shaped my head and kind of blew my mind was a company called Interactions. And they're still around today. And they did the most amazing voice interfaces. And what they actually did is they had humans behind the scenes as the speech recognition. It was intent, but they called it an intent analysis, and they could listen to the audio at 3x time, figure out what you said, and had built a whole amazing UX to drive through it. And you had these amazing automated phone calls where you could call up AppleCare and go through and describe your problem just as you would be talking to a person. And it was automation, but it wasn't. And they were always a little shady about whether, they didn't tell you exactly what is in there, but it was one of those pieces that opened my mind to, you don't always have to solve everything with technology. Sometimes you can cheat. And that's kind of guided a lot of my pieces is what's the result? What are you really trying to solve? And that was one of those, like I said, I look at it as both of those as creative places of voice technology where people did really creative ways to deal with the limitations around it. And I think there's still a lot of those cheats left to be figured out. I also think there's a lot more cheats that happen that people don't ever realize. It was never confirmed, but Apple Siri, there was a lot of suspicion that it actually was humans behind the scenes. I've never been able to really get a good answer of that, but when it first came out, and you think about that was in 2011 in the state of speech recognition, and I know what they were built on, they had accuracy that was just far beyond what was, I'll say, typical at that industry. And I don't think, I know with some of the technology they're going to, I think they probably cheated. We'll never know, because that's one of those pieces that you go through it. But it's, been one of the things that shaped this. To me, what's been interesting is I feel like we're finally now fast forwarding into some different generations. There was a generation 2, which I'll call the intent-based systems. And this is what made Siri and Alexa and Google Dialog. There's a bunch of systems that were built around this. But it was this really Band-Aid. It made a good UX, but my God, they were horrible to develop in. They had huge limitations. They weren't flexible. It was a 7-digit problem to deploy these things. And really, there was no way around it because the amount of tuning and crafting that was needed for it. Thank God we got past that relatively quickly, and brings us into what I'll call the current era, which we're all playing with, which is, of course, leveraging language models. Yeah. And to me, this is why I came back. I had actually given up on the industry. I said, I was a little bit jaded, didn't want to touch this anymore, because it was like, God, I've been doing this for 9 years. Everybody's doing the same things. And it never got out of the large enterprise. And that always frustrated me. But introduction of language models, I fundamentally do believe this gives the opportunity to bring these voice interfaces and virtual agents and whatever, people, we have a dozen buzzwords we want to call it as an industry, but it now allows us to take it much more mass market. And I think we can actually start deploying this in the SMB, in the mid-size. I think we're still a little ways before it gets to the full sort of consumer. There's still the sort of the science fiction version we all want. Will we get there? I don't know. That's economics, frankly. But someone has to figure out how to monetize it. But it's going through this. But now you can do amazing things, and there's still there's still problems right now. Latency, speed, cost that are biting you. But we're going to be past those in the next year. If I look over the last 2 years, which is what the universe I've been working in, we built our first generation voice Gen AI powered platform back in 18 months ago. Was our first release of this at Plum, and it got sold to Sharp and CX actually too quick. It was frustrating because we actually sold it before it was actually able to achieve the vision, and kind of said, what, I still want to solve this problem because there's so much more to be done. But the latency back then was horrible, but now it's snappy. You can actually build systems that are sub 500 milliseconds, which is kind of that line that you need to do for natural interfaces. Now, where I get excited is right now what I call the next generation, because right now what happened is we took large language models and we have been stuffing them into paradigms that we're familiar with. So we started with chat. That was the first interface that we started with, and we just crammed it into a chat window. And listen, it actually works pretty good. But it's not the right UX experience for many applications, especially when you get into more collaborative applications. Frankly, it sucks. Now, I think we are just starting to see the introduction of this. OpenAI is playing with this with their Canvas features. It's moving the right direction where it's more of a collaborative conversation and you're working around a document. I actually don't think we know what the UX is there. I think we're in this era. So you remember when iPhone just came out and you just had mobile devices with a powerful screen. Well, everybody started deploying software and they followed traditional desktop design patterns. And it was terrible for the first several years until people figured out how to design for mobile. Yeah. We're in the exact same piece with designing for AI. And as a UX, we're going to be figuring this out over the next several years. What works, what doesn't. And once we get there, it's going to be obvious, and we'll wonder how we weren't there, but it's not going to look I don't think software is going to look anything like it does in 3 years, because we're going to have it introduced in different places than we had ever worked with it, where it's much more conversational, it's much more natural language. But how do you actually fit that into most applications? It's not just sticking a microphone button. That's actually the Band-Aid and the quick, easy fix, but it doesn't actually make sense. I wish I could tell you what that looks like. I've got ideas, but that's going to be the cool part to figure some of this out.
Because you mentioned, in this sort of evolution, the latency, speed, cost. Latency, there were cheats to hide the latency in terms of the API. So you'd have like hums, ha's, paraphrase, standard like little jokey stuff, so you could occupy seconds. Now we see with OpenAI, and there's open source projects as well, where it's speech to speech.
Yes.
Without the delay. So I'm really interested in what you think is going to happen there.
So this is one of those pieces that I still don't think we're there. I played a lot with OpenAI's advanced voice mode, and it is a big improvement.
Yeah.
There's still some big things that we haven't figured out yet, and this to me is the chance for a lot of innovation. First of all, we are right now making our first transition to full duplex conversations with automated platforms. We have always been in a request response half duplex model.
Yeah.
And you did things like barge in to figure it out and try and make it more natural. But frankly, most of them are still using energy-based systems from the 80s. It's horrible. It doesn't actually work. It doesn't model how conversations. And we live in a full duplex world.
Yep.
As you and I are talking, I'm getting feedback from what you're listening to. I speed up, I slow down based on your head noddings, your ums, your buts. You might say something, and I will just keep talking because it's appropriate for me to keep talking.
Yeah.
Bargain doesn't account for this. And we actually have to push that intelligence into the model. And this really means full duplex, audio to audio interaction.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is this really is not an easy change in most of the enterprise systems were never designed for this. So this is going to be a huge disruption point for all called the big players. And this, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to come back in the industry is I see disruption. People are going to be trying to figure out how to put this square peg into the round holes of these systems. And it gives you a chance to innovate, disrupt, make a difference in an industry where it wasn't in there.
Yeah. Because I saw we've had NLU, natural language understanding, but where we're at is the cusp of natural language interaction.
Yes. And that model of just the bargain, that's such a small portion of the system, but it's incredibly complicated. And we are just starting to see people play with it.
Yeah.
And like I said, OpenAI is good, but that's not a solved problem, in my opinion, at all. It has to do with network. There's network latency, there's device latency. How do you manage all these pieces in a distributed system to actually make it work at scale? The other big thing I see in here is actually the omni-channel components of this. And what do I mean by that? Because omni-channel is like overly used. But guess what? Right now, I'm interacting with you via voice and video, and your video is just as important to me understanding what's going on in this conversation and how I pace my voice as the audio. In fact, it's more important, frankly, in this particular context. Just this morning, I was actually trying to use voice mode. And guess what? You can't switch between text and voice mode in the advanced mode. As soon as you try and send it a text prompt, you fall back to the old behavior because the model is audio only.
Gotcha.
And they're doing really cool stuff with consuming audio, but they haven't actually cracked the audio and text together. And honestly, this is a perfect, I was sitting here trying to outline my thoughts, and I had a whole write up and go through it, and I was trying to dictate it. And I realized I actually couldn't switch between the two, which was a perfect example of the types of things that we haven't sorted out. Now, in a year, I think we'll see that it's solved. Well, I won't say it's solved. We're going to see solutions to that because everybody's so quickly working around this. But that's a design pattern that none of us have thought about yet. And how do you actually make that work? I also think the multi-way interactions is much more complicated. And this actually gets into one of the problems that I think audio only introduces, which is the supervision, the guardrails. All of us, for the last 2 years when we introduced it, most people have implemented guardrails by looking at the text in being able to transmit and sort of supervise it before it goes out.
Exactly.
Well, when we're sending audio stream, that doesn't, well, I won't say it doesn't work, but it's a lot harder to work. You need streams to be able to understand the meaning and the content. And even words, the tone of the words can make a big difference in the actual meaning of it. Exactly. And we have to rethink what guardrails looks like, how coaching looks like, and how do you build a system on that? Like I said, I've got ideas. That's some pieces we've been thinking about, but I don't think there's yet a solution, and there's a lot of room for innovation as we go through this. Yeah. But where I was going with is, I actually think we have to get to the spot where we deal with the multi-user environment. This isn't just about me speaking with an AI. Potentially, you've got multiple AI actors or AI associates. You've got multiple people. You've got supervisors, human or virtual, that are in play. And how do these systems and platforms balance all of that and navigate that challenges? I think this is going to be a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of fun problems to solve in this space, a lot of room for innovation. I think there's some folks doing great work around it. There's some wonderful open source work being done. Dave, with Jambones has been a great leader in the space. I see great work being done both in the open source community and in the commercial space. And it's going to be fun to see all of this come together. And this kind of actually brings my role of standards, because I have, my background has actually been, I spent a lot of my time at Voxeo helping create the industry standards and the enterprise standards around this. Yeah. And I'm really excited for when we can get to bringing some of the standardization. I also feel like a lot of the ideas right now are not ready for standardization.
Yes.
Exactly. We still need to flush out what the right design patterns are. Yep. What should these systems look like? What do we need to change as we're going through this to make it work? And what I've generally seen is the technology pace is you go through these spots where there's rapid innovation, rapid new ideas. We're constantly, the world changes every 6 weeks. We're like, oh shit, how was that possible?
We have an answer. No, we don't. We have an answer. No, we don't.
And what I think will happen is I think we will have a pace where it smooths out. That doesn't mean innovation isn't happening, but it becomes what I call the more boring innovation. Yeah. Scale, latency, response time. But the patterns are consistent. But now it's about making it better, faster, cheaper, more deployable. Exactly. And that's where standardization comes into play. And I think we're going to need to do that at that stage to bring and make this so that we're not on a bunch of proprietary systems that are lock-ins for everybody. That's something I think is going to be an important bit. I think there's a time, I don't think we're there yet because I don't think we know I don't think we know what to standardize yet. And if we tried to standardize what exists now, it would suck by the time we got to the standardization committee because that's going through.
Exactly. Now, do you have any questions? Because I can see Holly's popped up. A visual.
Yes.
Go for it, Holly.
Hi, I'm back again. So this is my all of these things string together, and it's using people like myself who have been on the SaaS side, been on the customer side, and really are boots on the ground and understand the customer journey, and bringing in, what we do is we bring in big partners where we're like, hi, you want to test these things? Because I love AI so much. It's not about getting rid of people. It's about enhancing the people that you have. And then also on your bother points, right? Like if I'm a good salesperson, I don't want to see what your balance is or whatever. But a lot of my Medicare clients are using this for compliance, right? Making sure that all the compliance things are hit so that they're humans are humans, right? They're going to sell something instead of sell it within this box that's necessary. And so if you need a consultant, I'm very good at the customer.
I love this because actually this fits really well because we're focusing right now on customer communication and building AI to help with that. But there's so many what I'll call jobs that can be done that can be helpful with this in there. And actually, one of the ones that's been kind of near and dear to my heart is actually your virtual compliance officer. Yeah. Because this is something that people struggle with. Yeah. And actually, AI is really good if you.
And they do it after the fact. They don't do it during the fact. And so I built the first compliance for Sunrun when I worked for their first outbound third party call center. And so I worked really closely with Sunrun, NRG, because there's you take agents asking 2 questions and give them 15 questions and look at a roof. But what I chimed in because big enterprise is great. But if you haven't spent time on the ground with your customers, then that's where these challenges as you're describing your challenges, I'm like, it's not that hard actually. If you just have someone that has a brain and experience with the customer that wants to protect both sides, right? So that's really where I started consulting was, hey, let me break it. Let me tell you where people are going to complain. And then let me tell you about your customer. When I was in SaaS, I tried to drag the nerds to call centers. When I started in call centers, I'm like, hi, I'm going to go see your customer today. Would someone like to come with me so you can stop building stuff that no one's going to use? Yeah. So I think really, again, it's all about collaboration. That's why I love TAD Summit so much and this whole group of people. Again, I don't even have a college degree, but I do have a call center degree. I do have
One does not need a college degree to innovate space. Trust me.
No, I go on job boards. It's like, and blah, 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 blah. And you must have I'm like, you're missing out on so much talent. So many SaaS companies are built with one person has a degree and that's the CTO, and that's it. No, everyone else is like, hey,
CTO does not need a degree. I will prove that on that. So
you do not need a degree. If you have a degree, you've spent way too much time in school and not enough time working. So the problems that you were describing, I'm like, it's not really that hard if you understand.
Actually, it's funny. I'm going to my daughter's school tonight for it's basically they're doing a mentoring event and going to be working with young kids. And I had feelings because I'm going to go to school environment and be like, I've never actually gone to school and I'm going to mentor you on this. And I'm probably not going to deliver a message on the formal education that the private school wants.
But go work, go intern,
go build stuff, go innovate. You're going to go
break
through
things.
it. That's going to be fun.
Alan has my information. I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody. But it's really if we want to improve our ecosystems, we really got to work with all the people together, and that's really what I strive for. Is a community is way stronger than one person's idea, and we need the nerds and we need the people who are like, hi, this is how we want to use it, and then you nerd it into the nerd part.
No, the nerd it.
RJ, anything else you want to wrap up on?
I'll just do my kind of, as we're at the end of my time, I want to thank you for having me in here. This has been a lot of fun. I could geek out for hours on this stuff. We are just, I'll put my closing piece of what we're building with Consig. Our goal is to take this voice and conversational AI and AI building virtual employees that any SMB can use. Our critical goal is that engineers are not required. That's a design constraint that we're pushing really hard at. There's going to be some challenges to get there, but I think we can. And we're at the early stages. We're just starting. We're working on the initial set of seed customers. We're working on go through it. So as the network, if there's folks that are interested, reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen, rj@consig.ai. Love to talk, love to continue the conversation. And Alan, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, RJ. That was an excellent discussion. Thank you so much.